I chased after my best friend's older brother for 3 whole years, using every dirty trick I could think of. So much so that both of our families got involved. But by the time I graduated college, that iron tree still hadn't bloomed. He showed absolutely no sign of wanting to sleep with me. Well, every girl has to grow up eventually. There are plenty of good-looking men out there, so why should I keep fixating on one cold, emotionless guy? After graduation, I thought that if we ever met again, it would just be a polite nod and a faint smile. Who would have guessed I'd end up bowing my head and losing every ounce of dignity? Good morning, sir. Hello, boss. Fresh out of college, I joined a financial company in downtown New York. All the passion I once wasted chasing men, I poured into my career instead. And sure enough, hard work pays off. Within 6 months, I went from an ordinary office clerk to a financial assistant. Even my body slimmed down from a size M to a neat size S. That morning, the whole office was buzzing. Did you guys hear? The new boss is single and looks like a movie star. Yeah, rumor has it he's the ultimate diamond bachelor. I used to drool over men like that, but after what happened with Ethan Miller, my self-respect wouldn't let me sink that low again. I just smiled and listened quietly, refusing to join the gossip. During our regular meeting, we were going over documents when the door opened, and the man who stepped in made me drop the entire stack in my hands. Good morning, sir, everyone greeted in unison. I froze for a second, then lowered my head and muttered, Good morning, boss. Ethan nodded slightly, his face calm and distant, as if I were nothing more than a stranger. Throughout the meeting, I couldn't focus. His face, so familiar, yet so distant, kept pulling my attention. My coworkers, who had just been giggling about him moments ago, were trying to act composed, but I could tell they were swooning even harder than before. Of course, how could anyone stay calm in front of the man I had been hopelessly obsessed with for 3 years? Back in college, Ethan had been a legend. Handsome, brilliant, athletic. People used to say that those who were good with books were bad at sports, but that didn't apply to him. Basketball, soccer, ping pong, swimming, track, he excelled at everything. He was the true definition of an all-around golden boy, the kind every girl dreamed of. When the drama Summer Dreams went viral, I even mimicked the female lead and followed him everywhere. He just picked up photography at the time, but no matter what I did, he never seemed moved. He treated me just like everyone else. The lines I heard most from him were, "Hi," and "Bye." Lost in those memories, I didn't even realize when the meeting ended. Our usually quiet group chat suddenly exploded with messages. Who's brave enough to make the first move? I'm dying for some juicy gossip. Forget gossip, I just want a taste of that sweet candy myself. I'd love to, but he's way too cold. My 3 minutes of courage wouldn't last a second. Lily, you're still single, go for it. I immediately replied, no thanks, that melon's way too big for me to bite. Just then, Ethan's assistant appeared at the door. Lily, Mr. Miller wants to see you. I sighed. Probably another lecture about keeping things professional, acting like we don't know each other, or something along those lines. As I stood up, my coworkers started winking like maniacs. One even gestured dramatically, mouthing, "You got this." I rolled my eyes at them before calmly knocking on his office door. "Sir, you asked for me?" Ethan didn't look up from the documents he was reading. "There's a company dinner tonight, handle the arrangements." I hesitated. "Sir, that's not really part of my job." He finally looked up. "If I remember correctly, you're very good at organizing things like this." He wasn't wrong. Back when I was chasing him, I had arranged every party and event imaginable. Of course, he never showed up, and even if he did, he barely said a word to me. But now, things were different. I tried to decline politely. "Sir, I still have the quarterly report to finish. I'll give you a $3,000 bonus." My hesitation vanished instantly. "Yes, sir, I'll send you the plan shortly." "No need," he said flatly. "You decide." As soon as I left his office, I opened my phone and scrolled through all the fancy restaurants I'd been to with my friends around Manhattan, finally settling on a luxurious Japanese buffet called Sakura Garden. The restaurant I picked turned out to be both fancy and reasonably priced. Maybe it was because the food was good, or maybe because the boss himself was there, but everyone seemed unusually excited. Everyone except me. I sat there sulking. Ethan never liked parties and he hated Japanese food. Great. There went my $3,000. When we arrived, his face immediately darkened. I hurried to explain, "Sir, you told me to decide everything myself." He turned to me, his voice cold. "So from the start, you were certain I wouldn't come, weren't you?" Of course that was true, but for $3,000, I wasn't about to admit it. I shook my head frantically. "Not at all, sir. You didn't tell me what kind of food you preferred, so I made my best guess." He leaned closer, his breath brushing against my ear. "You don't even know what I hate eating? I thought you knew me like the back of your hand." Oh my God. His voice was low, his breath warm against my skin. It tickled my ear and sent a shiver straight down my spine. A completely ordinary sentence somehow sounded like a confession. My heart skipped several beats. Back in the day, I would have already melted, maybe even thrown myself into his arms and kissed him on the spot. But now I just wanted to kick him under the table. He was doing it on purpose, and he knew it. Sure enough, when people noticed us whispering, the whole table grew even more animated. Even our usually strict finance manager, who loved to nitpick my work, was smiling and serving me food. I glanced at Ethan from the corner of my eye. His expression was still cold as ever, but his gaze never left me. It was like he was searching for something in my face. Maybe I was imagining it. He was probably just annoyed that he'd been dragged to dinner in the first place. Meanwhile, our office group chat was blowing up. "Congrats in advance, future boss's wife. Don't forget us when you get promoted. Congrats, congrats. All that's left is for you two to have a baby." The more I ignored them, the crazier they got, so I gave up on explaining. A few of my braver coworkers, high on food and gossip, finally asked directly, "Sir, do you know Lily?" I nearly choked, bowing my head as I gulped down a glass of water. "That jerk," Ethan actually turned to me and said, "Do we know each other?" I spit the entire mouthful of water right onto his face. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Except I totally did." Serves him right for teasing me. He calmly wiped his face with a napkin and stood up. "Everyone, enjoy your meal. I'll head out first." I was about to cheer quietly when he glanced at me, eyes sharp, as if to say, "If I'm miserable, you don't get to be happy either." Then he said aloud, "You got my shirt wet. You're driving me home." I quickly tried to find an excuse. "Sir, I drank wine tonight." Before he could reply, one of my drama-loving coworkers squealed, "I'll drive you both." Ethan added fuel to the fire with a straight face. "I didn't drink. I'll drive." And just like that, under the curious eyes of the entire office, I had no choice but to get into his car. The drive was silent and suffocating. "Sir," I finally said, "you can drop me off at the bus stop. I'll get home on my own." He didn't respond. I couldn't tell if he was pretending not to hear or genuinely ignoring me. The car kept moving. "Sir?" I tried again, his jaw tightened. "Work is work. Personal life is personal. Don't mix the two." I frowned. "So what does that mean exactly?" He didn't answer. And by the time we reached my apartment complex, I still had no idea what he meant. "How did you even know where I live?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "Probably Emily told me." Emily was my best friend and his sister. I quickly bowed. "Thank you, sir. Sorry for the trouble." And before he could say another word, I bolted out of the car like my life depended on it. For a brief second before I turned away, I thought he was about to say something, but he didn't. Probably something boring like, "Don't be late tomorrow." Later that night, as I cooked myself some instant noodles, I grumbled under my breath, "It's all Ethan Miller's fault. I didn't even get to eat properly because of him." Ding dong. Who could be visiting this late? Probably Emily, coming over drunk again. "Emily, are you trying to drink yourself to death tonight?" I called out as I went to open the door. But the moment I saw who it was, I slammed it shut instantly and leaned against it, heart pounding. Did I just imagine that? Or did I open the door wrong? "Lily, open the door," came Ethan's unmistakable voice. Oh no, it really was him. Maybe if I stayed quiet, he'd go away. "Don't make me knock twice," he said, amusement creeping into his tone. "If you open the door right now, I'll give you $1,000. Click. I opened the door immediately. "Sir," I stammered, "it's late. I didn't open earlier because I didn't want people to get the wrong idea." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his voice laced with sarcasm. "So what, you're afraid of losing your job and your money?" I cut in quickly, forcing a smile. "Sir, you're so witty. What brings you here at this hour?" He looked completely serious. I came to borrow some noodles. Borrow noodles? I blinked, looking him up and down. He was wearing gray pajama pants and a loose t-shirt that did absolutely nothing to hide his toned six-pack abs. My heart skipped a beat. I nearly got a nosebleed. I quickly turned away. You? Live here too? Ethan gave me a polite smile, extending his hand. Nice to meet you, neighbor. I'll be counting on your care from now on. All the self-control I'd been clinging to instantly melted under that devastatingly charming smile. I could practically feel my nose start to bleed. Panicking that he'd get the wrong idea, I blurted out, the air's really dry lately. Just give me a second, and slammed the door shut. God, could I die of embarrassment right now? He was probably outside laughing his head off. Lily, you are hopeless, I scolded myself, taking a deep breath before forcing a wobbly smile and opening the door again. I just finished cooking noodles, I said awkwardly. Would you like to join me if you don't mind simple food? Before I could even finish, he stepped inside, replying, Thanks for the hospitality. Great, I just invited trouble into my own home. That meal was pure torture. Every minute felt like my face was on fire. Trying to sound casual, I said, So maybe you can wash the dishes afterward, sir? The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to slap myself. But to my surprise, he nodded and actually started cleaning up. I sat on the sofa, sneaking glances at him as he moved around my tiny kitchen. He looked so different now, more mature, more grounded. Back in college, I used to dream of this exact scene. I'd cook, he'd wash the dishes. Then we'd curl up on the couch. He'd lean back reading a book while I rested my head on his shoulder, maybe sipping wine together, watching some old movie. But before graduation, when I confessed to him one last time, he'd been as cold as ever. We're not right for each other. Even now, thinking about it still made my chest ache. It wasn't just rejection, it was a bucket of ice water poured straight onto the fragile pride of an 18-year-old girl. He'd said it right in front of his friends. They didn't laugh, but my face burned like fire. All I'd wanted in that moment was to disappear. And now that same first love, the one who had crushed me without a second thought, was my boss, teasing me with these confusing mixed signals. I still couldn't figure out what he was thinking. When he finished cleaning up, he said calmly, I'll head home. Tomorrow morning, get breakfast ready. I'll pick you up for work. By the time I snapped out of my daze, he was already gone. See, Lily, I muttered to myself, you're delusional. He just came over to mooch a meal. That's all. Still, if he could eat at my place, then riding to work together wasn't that strange, right? The next morning, I got up early, prepared a sandwich and soy milk, and waited by the door. Even though I kept reminding myself it was just breakfast between neighbors, between an employee and her boss, I still couldn't help dressing up. I put on a short skirt, light makeup, and perfume, like I was going on a date. When Ethan arrived, holding his own sandwich and drink, he looked surprised. You made breakfast too? Didn't you tell me to? I asked, my tone unconsciously sulky. He shook his head slightly. It's fine. I'll take this one then. He accepted my food naturally and handed me his. Want to try mine? The way he did it, so casual, so intimate, made it feel like we were a couple. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Terrified of getting carried away, I quickly pressed the elevator button. Since I'd rushed out early, I hadn't checked my phone yet. The moment I got to the office, my group chat was exploding with over 100 messages. The most recent one was pinned. Stop pretending. We all saw the live stream, I typed back furiously. You perverts, leave me alone. Then scarfed down my breakfast. Just as I finished, one of my drama-loving coworkers held up something with a triumphant grin. Guess what I just found? She lifted a half-eaten sandwich identical to mine. I just saw the boss eating the exact same breakfast. Same sandwich, same packaging. Still want to deny it? Look at those dark circles, another chimed in. Didn't sleep much last night, huh? I raised my hand seriously. I swear, there's nothing going on between us. Then maybe there should be, one teased, tugging lightly at the hem of my skirt. Come on, silence means consent. I gave up arguing because silence was golden. And just like that, the rumor spread through the entire company. Some said we were dating. Others claimed we'd already registered our marriage. A few even insisted we had a kid. I had truly underestimated my coworkers' gossip skills. From that day on, I decided I couldn't go to work with Ethan anymore. or people would think the rumors were true. It reminded me of one Valentine's Day years ago. Emily, his sister, had asked me to buy a gift for him. The next day, the rumor that Ethan and I were dating spread across campus for an entire month. After that, he treated me like I didn't exist, didn't even bother saying hello. No, I needed to clear things up right away. Just then, my phone lit up with a text from him. "I'll be working late tonight." Perfect timing. I was about to tell him we shouldn't ride together anymore when another message came in first. Good. I rolled my eyes, then texted Emily. "Hey, you wine addict, going to the bar tonight?" Her reply came instantly. "Nope. My jealous boyfriend banned me from hanging out with you. He thinks you're a threat." I sighed and replied with 3 words. Traitor. Love blind. I thought about calling a few other friends to go out, but remembering the rumors, I decided against it. In the end, I stayed home and drank alone. I was buying wine at the store beneath my building when I suddenly heard someone call, "Lily?" It had been a while since I'd heard that voice. "Long time no see," he said cheerfully. I sighed. "You're calling me ma'am now?" He laughed, slinging an arm over my shoulder. "Drinking alone tonight, huh? I'll sacrifice myself to keep you company." "Watch your mouth," I snapped, glaring at him. Instantly, Ryan Cooper, a former classmate who was at least 5 years younger than me, straightened up and changed his tone. All right, but hey, I need a favor." "What is it?" I asked warily. Before I could react, he wrapped his arms around me in a tight hug. I froze, staring at a fashionable young woman standing a few feet away, her eyes wide with shock. I understood immediately. "Hi there," I said smoothly, smiling at the girl. "I'm Ryan's stepmom. Has this kid been bothering you? Tell me, and I'll make sure his dad breaks his legs." The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she turned and ran off. Ryan groaned. "Why'd you have to steal my moment like that?" "Me? You're the one who grabbed me first." I glared, noticing his hand was still resting casually around my waist. I wanted to cut it off. He grinned sheepishly. Okay. Thanks for the help. I'll pay for your wine, deal?" At least he knew how to make it up to me. I sighed in defeat. Later, back at my apartment, Ryan made himself comfortable on my sofa, munching on snacks he'd brought while waiting for dinner. I nudged his leg. "Come help me out, kid." He smirked, scooting closer. "You know, Lily, we kind of look like a couple like this, do we?" I raised an eyebrow. Because to me, it looks fake as hell. His eyes darted toward the door, restless, distracted. He wasn't acting like a lovesick boy at all. I knew that look. He wanted something. Probably another one of his ridiculous favors. "Mother and son bonding, huh?" I said dryly. He froze, then suddenly turned serious. "Lily, are you still in touch with him?" The change in his tone caught me off guard. "You mean Ethan?" "Yeah. He's my boss." "I see," Ryan said quietly, his voice soft but oddly heavy. "And your neighbor too, right?" Before I could reply, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. Somehow I knew it was Ethan. I felt like a cheater caught red-handed. Ryan, sensing my panic, went to open the door himself. Ethan stood there, carrying 2 heavy grocery bags. When he saw Ryan, his expression froze. He set the bags down silently and turned to leave without saying a word. For a split second, I thought I saw something flicker across his face, something like disappointment. Maybe I imagined it. I crouched to check the bags. Wine, grilled food, and my favorite snacks. Oh, Emily must have been trying to play matchmaker again, begging her brother to buy my favorite things. That girl and I were definitely going to have a talk. "Lily," Ryan said awkwardly, "I'll get going." I patted his head. "After you help me wash the dishes." I regretted inviting him to stay for dinner, because now he refused to leave. "Come on, Lily," he pleaded. "Let me crash here tonight. I'll sleep on the sofa, promise. A good guy like me shouldn't be walking around alone this late. It's dangerous." I sighed. "Fine, but behave." I left him lounging in the living room and went next door. When Ethan opened the door, the smell of alcohol and cigarette smoke hit me immediately. "Since when do you smoke?" I asked. In the 3 years I'd chased him, I had never once seen him drink, much less light a cigarette. Maybe I never really knew him at all. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. That rough tone made my face heat up. His eyes, lazy yet intense, reminded me of a cat's, so alluring it made me want to reach out and touch him. I forced myself to look away. "Ryan's staying over at my place tonight," I said quickly. "He's sleeping on the couch. Is that okay?" Ethan exhaled heavily. then looked straight at me. Why didn't you wait for me last night? I blinked, confused. Didn't you say you were working overtime and told me to go home? He didn't respond. He just turned away and walked back inside without even closing the door. If he hadn't been drinking, I would have argued until dawn. Because this time, I knew I wasn't the one at fault. Ryan called a cab soon after, sensing the tension. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ethan's words replayed in my head over and over again. By morning, I was so tired I almost missed an important photography seminar. Pathetic. Maybe I'd been foolish long enough. Maybe it was time to quit this job for good. 3 years of chasing him. And here I was, still weak whenever he looked at me. I spent the entire seminar zoning out, lost in thought, until someone called softly behind me, "Lily?" I turned around, startled. "Ethan? What are you doing here?" He handed me a bottle of water without answering. "Did you used to come here every Saturday back in college?" Ethan asked quietly. "Yeah," I said with a small smile. "I used to follow you around, begging to be your model. You refused, so I secretly took your photo and entered it into an exhibit. Never won anything, though." As soon as I finished speaking, a memory flashed through my mind. Back then, I'd once casually said a senior from another class was handsome. Ethan, who had been standing nearby, suddenly went cold and walked away without a word. Could it be? No, I was probably just imagining things again. He interrupted my thoughts. "I don't usually like taking pictures, but today's an exception." "So today you'll be my model?" I asked, unable to hide the excitement in my voice. All my carefully built-up resolve to keep my distance vanished as I grinned from ear to ear. "Hurry up before I change my mind," he said. His cheeks were slightly flushed. Was he embarrassed? Or was it just the summer heat? I lifted my camera, unable to look away. He looked perfect. A flawless mix of angel and devil, like a live-action version of Sesshomaru himself. I had barely snapped a few shots when other photographers nearby noticed him and asked to join in. I stepped aside, just watching him from a distance. "You're not taking any more?" he asked as he walked back over. "It's fine," I said, smiling. "I think I got what I wanted." Then he suddenly reached for my hand. His palm was cold. So cold it startled me. It was the first time he'd ever taken my hand on his own. I remembered back in college, I used to slip his glove into a plastic bag just to preserve the warmth he left behind. But now, I gently pulled my hand away and said what my heart had been trying to accept for a long time. "I don't like you anymore. I know you don't feel the same way about me, so please, don't do things that can be misunderstood." His eyes darkened instantly, like a wounded cat's. "I see," he murmured, pausing. "Are you heading home?" I forced a smile. "Sure. I'll just call it a ride from a kind neighbor. Thanks for the lift, neighbor." Back home, I messaged Emily. "Your brother and I will never happen. Please stop trying to set us up." She didn't reply. Ethan had been unusually quiet too. No sign of him leaving the house or coming back. The next morning, as I walked to work, I glanced at his door. Still no movement. When I arrived at the office, people were whispering, "The boss isn't here today. Maybe he's sick?" Someone even came up to me. "Hey Lily, do you know anything?" I forced a laugh. Why would I? But my heart tightened. In all the years I'd known him, I could count on one hand the times Ethan had been sick. Still, something didn't feel right. I called Emily, no answer. So I texted her, "Your brother didn't come to work today. Can you check on him?" Hours passed with no reply. By the end of the day, I was pacing nervously, debating whether I should go myself. But what excuse would I have? Just as I stepped out of the building, my phone buzzed. "I'm out of town. My brother's not feeling well. Could you look after him for me?" "Thanks." Perfect. A legitimate reason. "Great, Lily," I muttered to myself. "You said you didn't like him anymore, remember? So why are you panicking like this?" Then I sighed. Whatever. Saving a life is more important than saving face. With my heart racing, I hurried home and knocked on his door. "Ethan! Ethan, it's me." No answer. I kept knocking. "Open the door. Are you trying to die in there?" Finally, the door creaked open. He was pale, leaning weakly against the frame, breathing hard. "Help me inside," he murmured. I rushed to steady him, his weight collapsing against me. The faint scent of lavender and the heat radiating from his body made my cheeks burn. Once, years ago, I used to secretly wish he'd fall sick so I could take care of him, just to have an excuse to be near him. Now I just wished he'd take his medicine, eat some porridge, and let me leave. His apartment was a mess. Clothes, magazines, and socks everywhere. That was strange. He used to be so neat that I hadn't even dared touch anything in his room before. Whatever. I told myself I'd clean up, then go home. This wasn't my responsibility anymore. After I cooked some porridge, I asked, "Where do you keep your cold medicine?" "I don't take medicine," he said, crawling under the blanket. "I'll be fine in a few days." "You need fresh air," I said, walking toward the window. "Let me." Before I could finish, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me off balance. I fell onto the bed beside him. My heart pounded so fast I thought it might explode. I couldn't even look him in the eye. "You're burning up," I stammered. "Let me get a cool towel." "I'm cold," he whispered hoarsely. "Can I hold you for a bit?" Then he nestled against me like a cat seeking warmth. Was he whining? Every rational thought in my head screamed for me to push him away, but my body betrayed me. Before I realized it, I was holding him. His warmth seeped through my skin, his familiar lavender scent mixing with something deeper, masculine, intoxicating. My head spun. Even in his feverish sleep, Ethan didn't rest quietly. His hand began to move, wandering under the hem of my shirt before sliding out again. A jolt ran through me, leaving every muscle frozen. I tried to catch his hand, to stop him, but he let out a soft groan and buried his face deeper into the crook of my neck. His breath was scorching against my skin, making my whole body go weak. "Lily?" He murmured my name in his sleep, voice raspy, full of exhaustion and something that sounded dangerously close to longing. Just one word, one fragile call, and every wall I'd built came crashing down. The hand that had been ready to push him away faltered, then, almost involuntarily, wrapped around him tighter. So even in his weakest moment, the person on his mind was still me. I felt his body relax, his breathing steadier, as if he'd found what he was looking for. His wandering hand finally stopped, resting innocently at my waist. It wasn't desire, it was comfort. Just a simple, fragile need for warmth. Slowly, he drifted into a peaceful sleep. His breathing deepened, even and calm. I didn't dare move. His arm was locked tightly around me, and all I could do was lie there, feeling the rapid beat of his heart pressed against mine. His face was so close, I could see every detail, the curve of his lashes, the soft line of his lips just inches away. It was too hot. I swallowed hard. I was still a woman after all, and this man had been my unreachable crush for 3 years. If things continued like this, my reason was going to shatter. Right as a reckless thought began forming in my head, his eyelashes fluttered. He stirred awake. I exhaled in relief. My body felt like I'd just survived a battle. "I think I caught your cold," I said quickly, using it as an excuse while trying to free my hand from his grip. "I should go home and rest. Remember to take your medicine and eat your porridge." As I tried to sit up, his fingers tightened around my wrist. His voice, still hoarse, whispered, "Don't go." "You've already eaten and taken your medicine," I said, forcing a smile. "You should rest early, I'm heading home." "Stay tonight," he said suddenly. Those words hit me like a lightning bolt. My mind went blank. Seeing my startled expression, he added calmly, "I'm just worried you might get a fever too. If we're both here, I can look after you. It's my responsibility since you caught this from me." My face went up in flames. Right," I muttered, trying not to choke on my words. The next day, I called in sick. Of course, that only made things worse, because by noon, our office group chat was exploding again. "Lily, still denying it? Girl, your cheeks must be sore from slapping yourself every day. Stop pretending to be innocent, Mrs. Boss. We don't even dare to borrow money from you now. Relax, we just want gossip. When's the wedding? We need time to lose weight for the bridesmaid dresses." I groaned, rubbing my temples. My head throbbed worse than the fever. These women had way too much free time. The group used to be silent for weeks. Now it was like a full-blown drama club. Just as I was about to mute the chat, a familiar voice spoke behind me. "What's got you so focused?" I nearly dropped my phone. Ethan was standing right behind me. "Nothing," I stammered, quickly setting it down. "What do you want for lunch?" he asked. "I'll cook." Before I could even process it, he was already wearing an apron. At that moment, I honestly couldn't tell whether the universe was punishing me or rewarding me. The past 2 days living under the same roof with him felt like stepping into an old dream I'd never dared to relive. He cooked incredibly well, something I'd known for years but never actually experienced. There's a saying, meeting the right person at the wrong time is the cruelest fate. That was exactly how I felt now. As he chopped vegetables, he said casually, "My mom asked me yesterday what you'd like to eat. She said she'd bring something over this afternoon." I froze. His face was unreadable, his tone neutral. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. In the past, he'd always avoided introducing me to his family, afraid of misunderstandings. So what did this mean now? My heart fluttered stupidly, and I must have spaced out, because he glanced at me and said gently, "Don't overthink it. She just felt guilty since you caught my cold. That's all." Right? What was I even hoping for? Hadn't I already reminded myself countless times, he's just my boss, my neighbor, nothing more. Stop dreaming, Lily. I already have plans tonight, I said casually. Please thank your aunt for me. Is it with Ryan? Ethan asked. His voice was calm, but his face suddenly paled. It had just been a random excuse, but his question made me flustered. I didn't know how to respond. "It's fine," he said quietly. "You don't have to tell me. Whatever our relationship is, you're not obligated to report anything to me." If it had been anyone else, I would have thought they were jealous. But with him, it was clear. He simply didn't want to talk about it further. Still, the way he cooked that evening almost made me hum with delight. His food was so good that it put all of my dishes to shame. It felt like there was nothing this man couldn't do. Maybe because he was still recovering, he didn't eat much. Instead, he kept picking food for me, watching me eat with a faint smile that made me so embarrassed I could barely finish half my plate. After dinner, I volunteered to do the dishes. "I ate, so I should help out," I said. Without a word, he rolled up his sleeves and tied my apron for me. The heat of his breath brushed against the back of my neck, and my heartbeat instantly went wild. Then he said, almost casually, "My mom said she already bought some groceries. She wants you to invite Ryan over for dinner too." I turned around in surprise. Our eyes met, so close that if I leaned forward even a little, our lips would touch. I found myself staring at his mouth, swallowing hard. He lowered his head slightly, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. "Do you want to try?" The way he said it, half serious, half playful, made my whole face burn. I turned away quickly. "Ryan said he has plans tonight." His smile deepened, but he stepped back, putting some distance between us. We waited for his mother to arrive. I decided to stay a while longer, reading on the sofa, while Ethan worked at his laptop. It was the first time I'd seen him wear glasses. They made him look even more attractive, refined, intellectual, devastatingly handsome. Every time he looked up, my heart stumbled a little. "If you're sleepy, go ahead and lie down," he said gently. "Okay," I murmured, obeying like a child. I went to his bedroom, pulled the blanket over myself, and drifted off almost instantly. In the haze between sleep and waking, I felt something soft brushing against my lips. When I opened my eyes, my face was hot. No way, I told myself. It was just a dream, probably rain hitting the window. Then I blinked and froze. Ethan was in the bed beside me. He looked half asleep, his voice low. "What's wrong?" He didn't seem to think there was anything strange about us sharing a bed. That only made me feel even more mortified. "Lily, Ethan, come eat," his mother called from outside. Startled, I rolled right off the bed, tangled in the blanket. "Yes," I stammered. At the table, I kept giving Ethan pointed looks, silently begging him to explain the situation. But he calmly ate his food, saying nothing. I was so frustrated, I ended up eating twice as much out of spite. "Lily, you've lost weight," his mother said with concern. "This boy must be giving you trouble. Come spend New Year's with us. I'll make sure you're fed properly." "Auntie," I said quickly, "my grandmother's turning 70 this year. My family has to go back home to celebrate." "Oh, that's fine," she said warmly. "Then Ethan can come with you. It's time he met your relatives. You should show him off." Wait, why did this sound exactly like a wedding discussion? This was a huge misunderstanding. "Sir," I said, standing up straight, trying to sound formal, "would you please explain?" Ethan blinked innocently. "You mean, explain why I was asleep in your arms?" I almost threw my chopsticks at him. He was getting way too good at this. His tone, his teasing, that sly glint in his eyes. And the worst part? His mother was smiling the whole time, clearly pleased. Even if I jumped into the Hudson River, I'd never wash this clean. Fine, I gave up. As soon as she left, I bolted out of there like my life depended on it. I couldn't let him ruin my reputation any further. But when I got home, my phone buzzed. Mom, Lily, tell Ethan not to buy so many gifts for the holidays. You two should save some money. When are you coming home for dinner? I'll tell your dad to prepare something nice. Seriously? I hadn't even dealt with the company gossip, and now both families were getting involved. If only I hadn't let my mom and his mom become friends back then, maybe things wouldn't be this tangled. At this point, it seemed like there was only one way out. Either get married or fake a relationship with someone else for the holidays. But after that night we shared a bed, Ethan's attitude toward me completely changed. I started wondering if the man I'd chased for 3 years was a completely different person now. Breakfast and dinner together were one thing, but he didn't even stop there. The peak of it all came on the weekend. Ethan had somehow turned into a perfect house husband, cooking, waiting for me to come home, acting as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I seriously started to wonder if the fever had fried his brain. Boss, I said cautiously, maybe I should take you to a doctor. He leaned back lazily, smirking. Why go to a hospital when I have you? Wouldn't a personal checkup from you be more accurate? At this point, he didn't waste a single chance to flirt with me. Thankfully, those 3 miserable years of unrequited love had built up my immunity. Otherwise, I would have collapsed long ago. Abusing his position shamelessly, he had somehow turned me from a financial assistant into his personal assistant. Every day I'd hear, Lily, come eat lunch. Lily, it's afternoon tea time. Lily, have some fruit. By the end of each day, his voice echoed in my head until I wanted to scream. Do you think I'm a pig? I finally snapped. He looked amused. Does it make you happy to tease me like this? I'm done. I'm quitting, I said flatly. And I meant it, not only because my size S had vanished under a layer of stress-eating fat, but because my heart simply couldn't take it anymore. If things kept going on like this, the fragile wall of pride I'd spent years rebuilding would crumble completely. His eyes turned red, voice hoarse. So, I didn't do well enough, is that it? I grabbed his shoulders and shook him. Stop it, you monster. Just stop. Immediately, the warmth vanished from his face. His expression returned to that cold, unreadable mask. You really want to quit? I exhaled slowly. Yes, this position doesn't suit me. When I left, I rubbed my stomach in defeat. Half a year of dieting, gone in 1 month. I was even chubbier than before, no doubt thanks to his constant feeding. He definitely did it on purpose. After I resigned, Ethan didn't contact me again. At first, it was a relief, but over time, the quiet became emptier, lonelier. Every time I took out the trash, my eyes instinctively drifted toward his door across the hall. I told myself to stop. We were never meant to be. As the Lunar New Year approached, Emily called me. So, what's going on between you and my brother? Don't tell me you two are getting married already? I sighed. We never even started, Emily. Don't believe the rumors. She went quiet for a moment, then said softly, You know he's been going on blind dates lately, right? He even moved to a new place. My chest tightened. I see, I said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. That's probably for the best. Emily's voice dropped. Lily, my brother likes you. He really, really likes you. Don't you get that? I let out a bitter laugh. Please don't lie to me. You know I chased him for 3 years. If he really liked me, why didn't he say anything back then? I know, she said. But he told me he was planning to say it after graduation. I froze. What? Come on, Lily, she continued. Haven't you realized he has 2 sides? That cold, distant act he puts on, that's just for show. But that soft, clingy side you saw when he was sick? That's the real him. My hands trembled. You mean... He was afraid I'd push him away, so he pretended not to care? Maybe, she said quietly. God, I had pushed him away. I thought he was toying with me when he acted sweet. But Emily went silent after that, as if she knew words wouldn't fix what was already broken. Since I'd left the company, I hadn't checked our office chat group much. When I opened it today, the old gossip group had turned into a full-blown drama society. Did you guys hear? The boss hasn't been coming in. He's been busy with blind dates. Yeah, apparently he's looking for a wife, like right away. Poor Lily, guess she broke his heart. I heard the day she quit, the boss trashed his office. He was furious. And that night, someone saw him drinking alone at a bar. A bunch of girls were all over him. I stopped reading. My chest ached. Why did it hurt when it had nothing to do with me anymore? Then, out of nowhere, Ryan showed up again. He must have heard from someone that I'd quit my job at Ethan's company because he wouldn't stop pestering me to join his father's firm. I refused, but he didn't give up. Every day he'd invite me to eat, play, or get some fresh air. "Don't you have work to do?" I asked. "I work hard," he said with a grin. "But since you're not working anymore, what am I supposed to do? Someone has to keep you company." His logic made no sense. "Come on, the steak here's amazing," he said, cutting a piece and offering it to me. "I can eat it myself," I replied, scooting my chair back, and stopped sitting so close. Today, though, he was acting strange. He'd told me to dress nicely and brought me to a fancy restaurant clearly meant for couples. Was he planning to confess? I was so nervous I could barely eat. "Ryan, you're a great guy, but Before I could finish, his face lit up. "Boss! Mr. Miller!" My entire body froze, my heart stopped for a beat. Ethan was standing there. He looked thinner, paler, tired in a way that hurt to see. He glanced at us briefly. I nodded stiffly, pretending to be composed, and sat down again, my chest tightening. I looked at the woman sitting beside him and suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. All I wanted was to go home. I took a few deep breaths, forcing myself to calm down. "It's over," I reminded myself. "He and I are done." Just as I was regaining composure, Ryan suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Come on, Lily. Let's go say hi." Before I could react, he'd already pulled me over to their table. The air instantly turned suffocating. Ryan's arm wrapped around my shoulders, tight, firm, but empty of warmth. It felt like he was just completing some mission. He even winked at me when Ethan wasn't looking. "Mr. Miller," Ryan said brightly, "Lily and I are getting married soon." "Congratulations," Ethan replied calmly, his face expressionless as ever. I had wanted to correct him, to deny it immediately, but hearing Ethan say that, I could only mumble, "Thank you." "How wonderful." The beautiful woman beside him smiled sweetly. "You must be Lily, right? I've heard so much about you. You're adorable." "You're very beautiful yourself," I said politely, forcing a smile. "You and Mr. Miller really suit each other. We shouldn't interrupt your meal." I tugged Ryan back toward our table before I lost control of my expression. As I sat cutting into my steak, Ryan leaned in and said gently, "Let's play badminton later, okay? If you're upset about something, just take it out on me." "I'm not upset," I said flatly. "Why would I be?" My voice cracked slightly. "It's not like I just gained a fiancé out of nowhere or anything." He chuckled awkwardly and rubbed the back of his neck. "I just wanted to make him jealous a little." I sighed. "You didn't make him jealous. You made me want to strangle you." All right, he said with a grin. "The New Year's coming. Come to my house before your mom scolds you again. Who knows, maybe they'll set me up on a blind date too. You can help me out." "Fine," I muttered. "Might as well help you finish the job." For a brief moment, I'd thought Ryan might actually like me. Turns out, that was just another illusion I'd created for myself. By the time we finished eating, Ethan and the woman were gone. Their table was completely empty. "I'm tired," I said quickly. "I'm heading home, you go play without me." As soon as I stepped through my door, tears started streaming down my face. Back in college, after the last time I confessed and he rejected me, I'd promised myself that would be the final time I'd ever cry over Ethan Miller. But less than a year later, there I was again, weak, heartbroken, and alone. This time, I couldn't even blame him. It was my fault for losing him, for not understanding him when I had the chance. The more I thought about it, the more it hurt. I cried until I didn't even know when I'd fallen asleep. Ding dong. The doorbell rang urgently, jolting me awake. I stumbled toward the door, so disoriented I forgot to put on my shoes. "Ethan?" I gasped. He stood there, his eyes glassy, the smell of alcohol heavy on his breath. Before I could say a word, he pulled me into his arms. "Can I borrow something from you?" he murmured, his voice low and unsteady. "You're drunk?" I said, startled. "I just want to borrow a little love," he whispered against my ear. "Just a little. I promise I'll give it back to you, tenfold, 100-fold. His tone was soft, broken, almost like a lost puppy begging not to be left alone. "How did you even get here like this?" I muttered, half exasperated, half worried, as I guided him to the sofa. "Let go so I can make you some honey water," I said gently. "Only if you say yes," he murmured, his arms tightening around me. The logic was absurd, but something about it still made my heart ache. He really did smell like whiskey. It was strong, raw, real, not faked. But before I could say anything else, his lips crashed against mine. The kiss was fierce, wild and consuming, like a summer storm. I didn't even have time to react. "This is my deposit," he breathed against my mouth, his words slurred but his tone deliberate. "I'll pay back the interest later." But that kiss didn't stop there. It deepened, hungry, desperate, full of every ounce of emotion he'd buried for years. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't testing. It was possession. He kissed me like he'd been starving, like he was claiming something he thought he'd lost forever. His tongue tasted faintly of liquor and longing, and my body gave out beneath him. My knees went weak, my mind spinning from lack of oxygen. Instinctively, I gripped his shoulders just to keep from falling. Sensing my surrender, he suddenly lifted me into his arms. I gasped softly, startled, my hands flying up to clutch his neck. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his gaze heavy, filled with intoxication, tenderness, and an unmistakable sense of ownership. Still holding me, he carried me into the bedroom and gently laid me down on the soft sheets. Then he placed his hands on either side of me, leaning in close. Under the warm, golden glow of the bedside lamp, his face looked almost unreal, like a sculpture carved with impossible precision. His usually cold eyes were softened by the haze of alcohol, turning dangerously seductive. "The deposit and the interest," he whispered hoarsely. "I'll pay them all back right now." Before I could even form a response, he lowered his head again, pressing another kiss against my lips. This time softer, slower. Not wild anymore, but trembling with emotion. But instead, it turned gentle, lingering, tender. His hand brushed through my hair, tracing a slow path down my cheek, then lower still. At some point, our clothes had quietly fallen away, piece by piece, scattered across the floor. Moonlight spilled softly through the window, coating everything in a silvery haze, like the world itself was holding its breath. That night, every wall I'd built, every ounce of pride I'd clung to, melted under the warmth of his touch. I could hear my heartbeat, and his. They pulsed together, merging into one rhythm, a wild, trembling symphony that neither of us could control. After a long, dizzying night of tangled breaths and whispered names, I drifted into sleep in his arms. I heard him murmur near my ear, his voice full of satisfaction, but also something fragile, like someone afraid to lose what they'd just found. "My little one," he whispered, as if afraid the sound itself would wake me. Half asleep, I snuggled closer to his chest, wrapped in that peace I'd chased for so long. That night, we simply held each other. No words, no more pretending, just warmth and stillness. When morning came, I woke up in the comfort of his strong, steady arms. My body ached faintly, clear proof that last night had been real, not a dream. I lifted my head slightly. Ethan's sleeping face was right there in front of me. His long lashes cast soft shadows over his cheeks, and the usual cold sharpness in his features was gone. All that remained was calmness. 3 years. I'd imagined this scene 1,000 different ways, what it would be like to finally wake up next to him. And now that it had happened, it was even sweeter than I could have ever dreamed. A quiet, glowing happiness filled every corner of my heart. Smiling, I reached out to gently trace the outline of his face with my fingertips. He stirred, sensing my gaze. Slowly his eyes opened. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just that deep, possessive look as his eyes swept over my face. In their depths, I saw the faintest glimmer of amusement and unmistakable satisfaction. The arm around my waist tightened, pulling me closer until our foreheads nearly touched. He smiled lazily, his voice hoarse and rough from sleep. "I didn't go too far last night, did I?" I flushed instantly. The nerve of this man. After completely devouring me, he had the audacity to act innocent. "You monster," I muttered, unable to meet his eyes. He chuckled, the sound low and magnetic. I reached up, tugged lightly on his collar, and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. "Since you like borrowing things so much," I teased, "then you can borrow me too." For a heartbeat, he froze, then laughed, a bright, boyish sound that warmed the entire room. In an instant he rolled us over, trapping me beneath him again, his breath hot against my neck. "Borrowing with interest," he murmured. "Let's make it 1 + 1 = 3. I smirked, meeting his gaze. "Why not 4? His eyes darkened, glinting with playful challenge. In the days that followed, I finally learned what it meant when people said men could be endlessly persistent. Ethan proved that theory with exhausting perfection. Once, While he had me pinned against the kitchen counter, demanding his reward, the doorbell rang suddenly. Finally! Emily's voice rang out from the hallway. The missing couple has resurfaced. I froze in panic, while Ethan reluctantly stepped back. Emily swept inside dramatically, hands on her hips. My brother wouldn't let me visit you, you know? So he's the mysterious boyfriend, huh? That's right, Ethan said smoothly before I could speak. Emily laughed. Good. Then later I'll introduce you to my boyfriend. But when I saw who walked in behind her, I nearly dropped the mug in my hand. Ryan? I blurted out. Ethan's reaction was instant. He stepped forward and wrapped his arm firmly around me. Ryan looked awkward but tried to play it off. Come on, Ethan. Don't be so serious. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't be standing here with your sister-in-law today. Exactly, Emily said cheerfully. You told me not to bother Lily, so I had to ask Ryan for help. It was then that I finally learned the truth. Ethan had liked me all along, long before I ever confessed to him. Those parties I used to organize, the ones he never showed up to, he'd skip them on purpose, because he didn't want to share me with anyone else. And the few times he did come, saying nothing, sitting silently in the corner, it wasn't indifference. It was restraint. Because every time I ignored him, he was afraid his feelings would give him away. He hadn't let me take photos of him, either. Not because he hated it, but because he knew the moment I captured him, I'd see it in his eyes. The truth. Because he thought I loved photography more than I loved him. Even that last confession of mine, when I thought he was rejecting me, he had actually planned to say, we're different, but maybe we could try. But I didn't let him finish. The moment I heard, we're not a match, I ran away. He was devastated for a long time. By the time he wanted to explain, I'd already blocked him everywhere. To become my boss later on, Ethan had invested nearly all his savings, just for a chance to stay close to me, to take another step forward. He'd even deliberately stood out in the rain that night, just to get a fever, knowing I'd come take care of him. And that whole blind date thing? I asked softly, my head resting against his chest. The dates were real, he said, smiling faintly. But the women weren't the point. Every time I went, I wished it were you sitting across from me. And yet, I muttered, you still let me think you were actually dating someone. You were the one who tried to make me jealous, he teased, brushing his lips against my forehead. You're not exactly innocent either. I shot him a mock glare. I'm not as sly as you. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. Then why don't you find out just how sly I can be? And with that, he kissed me again, slowly, deeply, pulling me back into that familiar, intoxicating warmth. For days after that, I lived wrapped in the rich, heady scent of him, the taste of his tea, his skin, his love. Ethan's side story. When I was little, my mother always said she'd wished for a daughter. So before I even entered kindergarten, my closet was filled with frilly dresses. My toys were all Barbie dolls. All my friends were girls. Maybe that's why, growing up, I ended up with a gentle side, soft-spoken, easily moved, even a bit clingy. Then, when I turned 3, my mother gave birth to my little sister, Emily. From that moment, my world changed completely. The princess dresses were replaced by superhero t-shirts. Dolls turned into toy cars. Back then, whenever I cried, my mom would scoop me into her arms and soothe me softly. But after Emily was born, every time I pouted or teared up, she'd frown and say, "You're the big brother now. You have to be strong so you can protect your sister." From then on, I learned to bury the weakest parts of myself deep inside. I stopped crying, but I also stopped smiling. I threw myself into studying, trying to do everything perfectly, to become the reliable, composed big brother everyone expected me to be. Through elementary school, high school, even college, I lived that way. Always composed, always distant. I got used to being alone. Even my relationships with my roommates never went beyond polite small talk. And then, she appeared. Lily. The girl with the brightest, most foolish smile I'd ever seen. Why do I call her foolish? Because she never realized how I felt. I never went to parties, but when she organized one, I forced myself to show up, just to see her smile. She complained that I barely said a word all night. She didn't know that sitting quietly in the corner, listening to her talk, watching her gesture wildly with her hands, was my favorite thing in the world. Somewhere in between those moments, I fell for her, without even realizing when it happened. She loved taking candid photos of me. She never knew that half the time I posed for her. I'd stand where the light hit just right, pretending to be casual so her accidental shots would look perfect. Didn't she ever notice? In every picture she took, my eyes were on her. Always. On Valentine's Day, I didn't accept gifts from anyone, but I accepted the one she sent through Emily. I knew she liked daisies, so I spent an entire night making a box of daisy-shaped chocolates by hand. I'd planned to give them to her myself, but when the moment came, I couldn't do it. And she never realized how much I loved her. Even that last time before graduation, when she confessed again, I had already rehearsed my answer in my head. I was going to say, we might not be the same, but maybe we could try. But before I could get the words out, she heard, "We're not a match," turned around, and ran away. My smile froze before it could even form. The rest of my sentence died in my throat, and once again, all she saw was the same cold, unfeeling Ethan Miller she'd always known. As I watched her disappear down the hall, my heart shattered. That night, for the first time in years, I hid under my blanket and cried silently. Real tears. It was the first time I realized how heavy and suffocating this mask of cold indifference really was. But who would have thought that after that day, she'd be so determined to erase me completely from her life? I panicked. I threw away every bit of composure I'd ever learned, every ounce of pride I'd built up. I just wanted to hold her, to tell her I was sorry, to comfort her. But she'd blocked every possible way for me to reach her. For nights afterward, my pillow was soaked with tears. I thought about her constantly, and the more I thought, the clearer it became. My life simply couldn't go on without her. So, I poured every cent I had into investing in the company, just so I could get close to her again. That was the beginning of my mission, to win back my wife. Before that, I even warned Emily not to bother her. "Don't get too close," I told her. "She's your future sister-in-law. Leave her to me." The thought of finally being her coworker, her neighbor, seeing her every day, it made me so excited I couldn't sleep at all that night. But when I saw her again after a year apart, my heart clenched. She'd lost so much weight. I told myself right then and there, I'll make sure she eats well from now on. During that first meeting, I couldn't take my eyes off her, but she looked distracted, lost in her thoughts. Was she thinking of me? Or someone else? That idea alone made my chest ache. At the company dinner that night, I went even though I hated Japanese food, simply because she had chosen the restaurant. When she thought I wouldn't show up, I saw the disappointment flicker in her eyes, and it nearly broke me. Driving her home afterward, I was so happy I could barely keep my hands still on the steering wheel. It was finally just the two of us. For a moment, I almost started singing out loud. I told her, "Work is work, and personal is personal." What I meant was, at the office we're boss and employee, but outside of work, we could be something more. She didn't get it, of course, but that was fine. I'd show her what I meant through actions instead. That night, I decided to use my last resort, the charm offensive. I deliberately wore my loosest pajamas, the ones that showed off the abs I'd trained for a whole year, to distract myself from missing her. I hadn't expected the effort to pay off so spectacularly. She stared so hard she got a nosebleed. The plan was clearly working. She even invited me in for noodles. And those noodles, God, they tasted nothing like ordinary food. They tasted like home. When she told me to wash the dishes afterward, her tone was so natural, so teasing, that it felt like we'd already been living together for years. The next morning, I made her favorite sandwich. I hadn't expected her to prepare breakfast for me, too. She'd dressed up beautifully, makeup and all. I wondered if she'd noticed the tie I'd chosen that morning, the one patterned with tiny daisies. Her favorite flower. Everything was going perfectly, until Ryan showed up. The moment I saw him, every instinct in me screamed that he liked her. That night, I rushed to buy her favorite grilled food and beer, determined to use pity as my next strategy, to make her feel bad enough to let me stay. But instead, she sent me away. Seeing the two of them together, alone under one roof, I nearly lost my mind. I pressed my eye to the peephole, staring across the hall, watching. When he didn't come out for hours, I was certain he planned to spend the night. I couldn't take it anymore. I was about to storm over with some flimsy excuse, when she knocked on my door first. In a panic, I took a few gulps of whiskey and lit a cigarette, trying to look properly miserable. Instead, she scolded me, her anger cut deeper than I'd expected. But somehow, that made me love her even more. Fortunately, that punk Ryan heard he was supposed to stay at my place instead, and promptly ran off. That weekend, I learned she was attending a photography seminar, so I went too. But my excitement didn't last long, because there, in front of everyone, she said the words that froze me solid. "I don't like you anymore." It felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice water straight into my chest, in the middle of winter. But it didn't matter. Nothing she said could change the one thing I'd already decided. I was going to put her name on my household registry, one way or another. The next morning, I carried out my final plan, the pitiful sick man act. That night, I took 5 cold showers, sat in front of the air conditioner for hours until I finally caught a fever. And sure enough, it worked. When I heard her voice calling my name in panic from outside my door, my heart nearly burst out of my chest. I was as happy as a puppy wagging its tail when it sees its owner. The moment the door opened, I deliberately let myself fall weakly into her arms, putting on my most pitiful face. With this act, I was sure she'd soften up and stay to take care of me. And she did, more than I'd hoped. Not only did she stay, but she even cooked porridge for me. Watching her move around my kitchen, the soft light catching in her hair, I wished time would stop right there. Maybe it was the fever dulling my rationality, but the longing to hold her, to feel her in my arms, grew unbearable. When she finally sat down next to my bed, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I reached out, gently tugged her, and she lost her balance, falling right into me. Her faint citrus scent filled my head, and the warmth and softness of her body against mine sent my self-control spiraling. "But you're cold," I murmured, burying my face into the crook of her neck. Somewhere between fever and delirium, my hand moved on its own, slipping under her shirt, brushing against her skin. It was soft, hot, real. My mind screamed at me to stop, but my body, driven by the raw instinct I'd buried for years, refused to listen. She stiffened. I felt her try to push me away. Panic flickered through me, and from deep inside that haze, I whispered her name, softly, desperately. "Lily." Just that one word, and I felt her resistance melt away. The hand that was pushing me froze, then slowly came around me instead. She held me tight. That was all it took. Every insecurity, every sleepless night, every ache inside me vanished in that instant. I finally fell asleep in peace. It was the best sleep I'd had in years. Thanks to her care, my fever broke quickly. But in my stupidity, I managed to get my little wife sick instead. When I touched her forehead and felt how hot she was, guilt nearly crushed me. I wanted to kneel right there and apologize 1,000 times over. To take care of her, I insisted she stay the night. I even slept on the floor so she could rest comfortably. But when I woke up in the morning, somehow she had ended up curled up perfectly in my arms. Opening my eyes to her face, so close, I thought for a second I was still dreaming. After that, everything started to fall into place, as if the universe had finally decided to make it up to me. Both my mother and hers began to assume we were dating. Lily tried to get me to clarify things, but instead of clearing the misunderstanding, I teased her. "You mean you want me to explain the part where we slept together?" She went red from head to toe. After that, I took over everything: grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning. But my sweet wife didn't seem used to this new, gentle version of me. She'd grown accustomed to the cold, distant Ethan. She also refused to accept that she'd gained a little weight. But to me, it didn't matter. Slim, round, tall, short. I loved her all the same. So when she suddenly said she wanted to quit her job, my first reaction was panic. What did I do wrong? Tell me, I'll fix it. But it seemed like what she wanted wasn't the man I'd become. She missed the cold one she used to chase. I wanted to cry, honestly. But even crying, I knew I had to let her go, because with her beauty, there would be no shortage of people waiting to swoop in if I didn't protect her carefully. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink, so I came up with a plan. I spread a rumor that I was going on a blind date, looking for a marriage partner, just to see how she'd react. I didn't expect her to hit me right where it hurt. At dinner that day, I ran into her with an old friend. She was laughing, really laughing, and there was a guy beside her, cutting her steak like they'd known each other forever. Jealousy hit me so hard I could barely breathe. I wanted to grab that fork and jab it straight through the guy's smug hand, but I didn't. I just clenched my fists and smiled like nothing was wrong. Then that idiot had the nerve to brag in front of me that he was engaged. My mind went blank. I didn't even remember what I said after that. The dinner ended in a blur. When I got home, I drank. A lot. I told myself I'd get drunk enough to finally tell her everything I'd been holding in. But when the alcohol hit, my restraint vanished completely. I missed her so much it drove me insane. So I stumbled to her and knocked. I'd rehearsed 1,000 versions of what to say, but when she opened the door, her sleepy bare face staring at me in surprise, all that came out was, "Can I borrow a little bit of your love?" I just wanted her to love me again, even if it was only for a moment. I promised I'd return it, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. She didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Smart woman. She probably thought I was faking being drunk, but there was no turning back now. I pulled her into my arms. When she didn't push me away, I knew I had a chance. I leaned down and kissed her, softly at first. "This is a down payment," I whispered against her lips. But that kiss, it didn't stop at a down payment. It was an explosion of every ounce of love, longing, and desire that I had buried deep inside me for years. I kissed her with all the passion I'd ever restrained, as if I could merge my entire world into hers, as if by holding her close enough I could erase the distance of all those lost years. When I felt her soften in my arms, the last thread of rationality inside me snapped. I lifted her up effortlessly and carried her straight into the bedroom. "Principal and interest," I whispered against her ear, my voice rough with emotion. "I'll pay it all back, right now." And then I did. That night, I returned everything I owed her, the love, the yearning, the missed moments, with all the fire and devotion I had kept locked away for so long. When morning came, I woke to find her sleeping peacefully in my arms. In that quiet moment, I realized my nightmare was finally over. I caught sight of my own reflection in the mirror, the wolfish grin, the fake innocence I'd pretended to have, and couldn't help laughing at myself. But then she looked up at me, eyes still drowsy, and teased, "Since you like borrowing things so much, why don't I just let you borrow me?" Right then, I knew every second of waiting, every sleepless night, every drop of restraint had been worth it. That single sentence carried more power than any "I do" at a wedding. There was no way I could hold back after that. And everything that followed became the beginning of the happiness I had spent my whole life dreaming of.